In the year 2257, humanity had spread its wings far beyond Earth. Colonies had been set up on Mars, Europa, and a few moons of Jupiter. But one event changed everything. It wasn't a new colony or a peaceful mission. It was the arrival of the Qatar, a warrior race from a far-off galaxy. The Qatar were unlike anything Earth had seen. Towering, muscular, and fierce, they were known for conquering planets and leaving nothing but destruction behind. They arrived in massive ships, filling the sky and blocking out the sun. Their ships buzzed with energy, and their presence alone struck fear into the hearts of all who saw them. They had come to Earth, and they had no plans of leaving until they claimed the planet as their own. Captain Jared West was one of the first to know of their arrival. As leader of Earth's military operations, he knew the Qatar would be a tough enemy. But Jared wasn't just any soldier. He had been through wars, fought on distant battlefields, and led humanity's forces in some of their toughest moments. But this was different. The Qatar weren't here to negotiate. They were here for war. Jared's ship, the Odyssey, was docked at Earth's military base when the message came through. The Qatar had landed. His team was on high alert, ready for whatever came next. The Earth Defense Forces scrambled, preparing for the worst. "I want to make one thing clear," Captain West said to his team, his voice steady and filled with authority. "We fight for Earth. We don't give up. We don't surrender. If it comes to battle, we will stand our ground." His team nodded. They had trained for this, but no one truly knew what to expect. No one had ever faced an enemy like the Qatar. As they arrived at the landing site, Jared could see the Qatar's massive ships looming in the sky. The ground trembled under the weight of their arrival. Soldiers and officials stood by, nervously waiting for what was to come. But the humans were ready. They would fight for their planet. Suddenly, a figure appeared from one of the Qatar ships. The warrior stood tall and proud, easily 7 feet tall. She wore dark, shining armor that gleamed in the sunlight. Her hair was braided in long strands that shimmered like silver. There was a fierce energy in her eyes, a confidence that radiated from her. She looked like she had been through countless battles, and it was clear that she was not someone to be taken lightly. Captain Jared West stepped forward, his military boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. He held his ground as the Amazonian-like warrior slowly made her way toward him. Her eyes met his with an intensity that made him feel small, though he would never show it. "You are Captain Jared West," the warrior said, her voice low and commanding. She spoke in perfect English, though her accent carried a strange alien sound. "I am," Jared replied, standing tall in front of her. "And you are the invader." The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. "We are the Qatar," she said. "We conquer worlds. We don't invade. We liberate." Liberate. Jared's tone was sharp. Or destroy. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with curiosity. "Either way, we take what we want." Jared didn't flinch. He had seen countless invaders before, but none like this. The Qatar were ruthless. They didn't care about anything but victory. But Earth wasn't going to fall so easily. "We don't give up," Jared said firmly. "We fight, and we fight to win." The Qatar warrior studied him for a moment. Then, with a sudden movement, she stepped closer. In the blink of an eye, her hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Jared barely had time to react as she twisted his wrist, disarming him of his weapon in an instant. The soldiers behind Jared quickly raised their guns, but he held up his hand to stop them. "Hold fire," he ordered. The warrior held him in a grip so strong it almost made Jared's bones ache. Yet even in his position, he didn't show fear. This was a test of strength, will, and resolve. "You are strong," the Qatar warrior said. "I see why they put you in charge. But you are not ready for us." Jared's jaw clenched. "I'll never back down." The warrior released him with a quick motion. Jared flexed his wrist, feeling the sting, but he didn't show weakness. He wasn't about to be intimidated. "You think you can beat us?" she asked, stepping back. "We have the power of generations of warriors. You humans have only just begun to reach the stars. You are nothing compared to us." Jared's eyes locked onto hers. "Maybe," he said, "but we have something you don't understand." "And what is that?" the warrior asked, intrigued now. "Humanity's will," Jared replied. "We fight for our families, for our homes. We fight for survival. That's something you can't destroy." For a moment, the warrior said nothing. Then she turned and called out to her soldiers. They moved, obeying her without question, but her gaze never left Jared's. "This is not over, Captain West," she said, her voice colder now. "We will see who is truly stronger." As she turned away and rejoined her forces, Jared stood silently, watching her go. The battle had not yet begun, but he knew one thing for sure. Humanity would stand its ground. And they would fight, no matter what. The sun was setting over Earth's capital city, casting an orange glow over the landscape. The Qatar had set up camp just outside the city's borders, their towering ships casting long shadows over the land. Jared stood on a balcony in the military command center, looking out over the scene. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the strange encounter with the Qatar warrior. Who was she? Why had she spared him? For the past 24 hours, Earth had been on high alert. The Qatar hadn't made any further moves, but the tension in the air was thick. Earth's soldiers were ready for battle, but no one knew what the Qatar were planning. Jared's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. He turned to see his second-in-command, Lieutenant Maya Stone, stepping into the room. She had been with him through many missions, and he trusted her judgment completely. "Captain," Maya began, "we've received a message from the Qatar." Jared's eyes narrowed. "What do they want?" Maya handed him a datapad, and Jared read the message aloud. "We will meet again tomorrow at dawn. Prepare for a fight." The words were simple, but the meaning was clear. The Qatar were done talking. The battle was coming. "Any signs of movement?" Jared asked, glancing at Maya. "No, they're waiting for us to make the first move," she replied. "It's a trap." Jared nodded. He had suspected as much. The Qatar were skilled warriors, and they knew how to manipulate their enemies. But he wasn't about to fall into their trap. "We'll keep our distance tonight," he said. "We'll wait and see what they do. No one moves until I give the order." Maya nodded and turned to leave, but Jared stopped her. "Maya," he said, his voice serious, "be ready for anything. We don't know what we're up against." She gave him a sharp salute before walking out, leaving Jared alone with his thoughts. The Qatar had come to Earth to conquer it, but they didn't understand Earthlings. Humans weren't like the other species they had crushed before. They didn't give up. They fought back. The next morning, the city was eerily quiet. The sun had barely risen, and there was a heavy fog in the air, making everything look ghostly. Jared stood on the command platform, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Qatar ships were still there, but there was no sign of the warriors. "Ready the troops," Jared ordered. "Prepare for battle." As the soldiers geared up, Jared's mind raced. He knew the Qatar were watching. He could feel their presence, even without seeing them. They were waiting for the right moment to strike, and Jared couldn't afford to make a mistake. Then a loud rumble shook the ground. Jared's eyes shot to the sky as the Qatar ships began to move. It was time. "Move out," Jared shouted, and Earth's forces rushed into position, taking their places behind barricades and readying their weapons. But as they moved forward, Jared's heart raced. The Qatar were not attacking. Instead, they had spread out, forming a circle around the soldiers. The tension was unbearable. Jared could feel the sweat on his brow as he watched the Qatar warriors emerge from the fog. They were different from the one he had encountered before. More of them, all taller, stronger, and ready for war. Their leader, The same woman from before stepped forward. "I see you have prepared yourselves," she said, her voice cold but somehow calm. She seemed almost amused by the human's readiness. Jared stepped forward, his voice strong. "We won't let you take our world." The woman's eyes locked onto his. "I do not want your world. I want to see if you are worthy of it." Her words struck Jared like a blow. What did she mean by that? Worthy of Earth? He didn't have time to think. She raised her hand, and the Qatar soldiers began to advance. The battle had begun. The sound of blasters firing filled the air, and the soldiers on both sides clashed. Jared's heart pounded as he led his troops into the fray. The Qatar warriors were like nothing he had ever seen. Their strength was overwhelming, and their fighting style was fast and brutal. But Earth's soldiers were determined. They fought with everything they had, using tactics and teamwork that the Qatar weren't prepared for. The battle raged on, the ground shaking with every blow. Jared's mind was focused, calculating every move. He spotted the Qatar leader in the distance, fighting with a group of her warriors. She was faster than anyone he had ever seen, taking down soldiers with ease. Jared knew he had to stop her. "Cover me," he shouted to his team, and they formed a protective line as he made his way toward the Qatar leader. The battle seemed to slow down as Jared approached her. She saw him coming and smiled, almost as if she was expecting him. "You have courage, Earthling," she said, her voice barely audible over the chaos of battle. "But courage alone is not enough." Jared didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he launched himself at her, knowing that this moment would decide the outcome of the fight. The two of them clashed, their weapons flashing in the sunlight. It was a fight of strength, skill, and willpower. As they fought, Jared realized something. This wasn't just a fight for Earth. It was a fight for humanity's survival, and he would do whatever it took to win. The fight had reached a fever pitch. The sound of weapons clashing and explosions echoed across the battlefield. The Qatar warriors, with their unmatched strength and brutal tactics, were pushing Earth's forces back, but Jared and his soldiers refused to give up. Captain Jared West moved through the chaos, his every step calculated. His soldiers were fighting fiercely, but the Qatar were everywhere. Relentless, powerful, and seemingly unstoppable. Jared's eyes darted around as he searched for the Qatar leader. She was still out there, somewhere in the heart of the battle, and Jared knew he had to face her again. As he fought his way through the enemy ranks, he spotted her, standing tall, as always, in the middle of the battlefield. The Qatar warrior was cutting down Earth soldiers with swift, precise movements, her blade flashing in the sun. Her eyes locked onto Jared's, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. There was no more noise, no more chaos, just the two of them. Their eyes met, and Jared knew what had to be done. He pushed forward, cutting through the line of Qatar soldiers blocking his way. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline pushing him forward. The Qatar leader didn't move, but she watched him approach with a knowing smile. "You are persistent, Earthling," she said, her voice carrying over the noise of the battle. "But this fight is not one you can win." Jared's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't back down. "You underestimate us. We've fought worse battles than this." The warrior's eyes glinted with interest. "I see that. But this is different. You cannot stop us. We are the Qatar. We are made to conquer." Jared's voice was steady. "And we're made to survive." Without warning, the two clashed. The sound of their blades meeting filled the air as they danced across the battlefield, their movements swift and deadly. Jared was fast, but the Qatar warrior was faster. She struck with precision, each blow forcing him to step back. But Jared wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let her win. He fought with everything he had, using his training and experience to stay on his feet. The Qatar warrior was powerful, but Jared had something she didn't. He had the heart of humanity. She came at him again, swinging her blade down with incredible force. Jared parried the attack, his own blade scraping against hers. He saw an opening and lunged forward, but the Qatar warrior was ready. She sidestepped and knocked his weapon from his hand, sending it spinning through the air. Jared gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to let her win this way. With a swift movement, he tackled her to the ground, bringing the fight to the ground level. They struggled, each trying to gain the upper hand. The warrior was strong, but Jared had the will to keep fighting. "I won't let you take Earth," he shouted, using all his strength to pin her down. For a moment, the Qatar warrior seemed to hesitate, as if considering his words. Then, with a quick move, she flipped him over, reversing their positions. She was back on top, her blade raised high. "You talk too much," she said, her voice cold and emotionless. "This is not about words. It's about strength." Jared's heart raced. He had to find a way to turn the tide. He reached out, grabbing a rock from the ground and throwing it at her face. It hit her with a loud thud, and she recoiled, momentarily dazed. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Jared quickly got to his feet. He reached for his weapon, now lying just out of reach, but the warrior was already charging toward him. This time, Jared was ready. With a quick movement, he ducked under her attack, using his shoulder to knock her off balance. The Qatar warrior stumbled, and Jared seized the moment. He grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her back, and forced her to the ground. The battle wasn't over, but he had won this round. Breathing heavily, Jared stood over her, his weapon in hand. The Qatar warrior glared up at him, her expression a mixture of anger and respect. "You are strong, Earthling," she said, her voice low. "I will give you that, but we will never stop. We will never leave this planet." Jared's grip tightened on his weapon. "You don't understand," he said, his voice firm. "This isn't just your battle. This is humanity's fight, and we don't give up." The warrior laughed, but there was a strange glint in her eyes. "You speak of survival, Earthling, but survival is not enough. The strong rule, and I am strong." Jared's expression didn't change. Not strong enough. With one final push, Jared knocked the Qatar warrior's weapon from her grasp. She raised her hands in surrender, but her eyes were still filled with fire. She wasn't beaten. Not yet. "I will not forget this," she said, standing up. "You may have won today, but this war is far from over." Jared didn't lower his weapon. "We'll be ready. We will never stop fighting." The Qatar warrior studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and called to her soldiers. The Qatar began to retreat, their forces slowly withdrawing from the battlefield. Jared watched them go, his heart still racing. The battle wasn't over, but it was a victory. For now. The sky was darkening as Jared stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching the retreating Qatar warriors. The ground around him was littered with the wreckage of their weapons and the bodies of fallen soldiers. The battle had been brutal, but Earth had won. For now. Jared's breath came in ragged gasps, his body aching from the fight. His hand still gripped his weapon tightly, but his mind was already racing, planning for what came next. The Qatar were powerful, and they had only just begun their invasion. This was only one battle in a war that could last for years. "We've held them off," Maya said, walking up beside him. She looked out over the battlefield, her face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "But I don't think they're done." Jared nodded. "They'll be back. They'll regroup and come at us again. But next time, we'll be ready." Maya glanced at him, her expression serious. "We can't keep this up forever. The Qatar have more resources, more soldiers. We're outnumbered." Jared turned to her, his jaw set with determination. "We'll find a way. We always do." Maya didn't respond, but Jared could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't wrong. Earth's forces were strong, but they weren't prepared for a full-scale war against an enemy like the Qatar. They needed more than just courage. They needed a plan. "Captain," Maya said after a pause, There's something you need to see. She handed him a datapad, and Jared read the message on the screen. It was from the Qatar. The words were simple, but the meaning was clear. We will come for you again, but we offer you a choice. Submit to us now, or face complete destruction. Jared frowned. They want us to surrender. Maya nodded. It's not just a threat. They're giving us a chance to avoid further bloodshed. Jared's hand tightened around the datapad. We don't surrender, not to anyone. But the Qatar are different, Maya said quietly. They're not like the invaders we fought before. They're ruthless, and they don't negotiate. I don't care, Jared replied. We'll fight. Earth will never give up. Maya didn't argue. She knew what Jared was thinking, and she respected his resolve. But deep down, she shared his concern. The Qatar were unlike any enemy they had ever faced, and their forces were only going to grow stronger. The war was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. Later that evening, as the soldiers celebrated their hard-won victory, Jared sat alone in his office, staring out at the city below. He was lost in thought, trying to come up with a strategy to turn the tide of the war in Earth's favor. He had to find a way to defeat the Qatar, but how? They were strong, they were organized, and they had technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. The door to his office opened, and Maya stepped in. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching him. Jared finally turned to her. Any word from the Qatar? He asked. No, she replied. But we've been hearing rumors. Some of their warriors are different. Jared raised an eyebrow. Different how? Maya took a deep breath. There's talk of a new leader among the Qatar. Someone even stronger than their commander. They're calling her the Chosen. Jared frowned. What's her story? We don't know much, but she's said to be a warrior unlike any other. The Qatar believe she has the power to lead them to victory. Some even say she can defeat entire armies on her own. Jared's mind raced. This new leader could change everything. If the rumors were true, then Earth's forces had an even bigger threat to face. A leader like that could be the Qatar's secret weapon. Jared couldn't afford to underestimate her. We need to find out more, Jared said, his voice firm. If she's as powerful as they say, we can't afford to let her get close. I'll have my team investigate, Maya replied. We'll get the information we need. Good, but we can't waste time. If she's the Qatar's trump card, we need to stop her before she can make a move. Maya nodded and left the room, leaving Jared alone once more with his thoughts. He stared out at the horizon, the weight of the war pressing down on him. The Qatar were stronger than they had expected. And now, with this new leader, the stakes were higher than ever. The next day, Jared stood in the command center, studying the map of Earth's defense lines. The Qatar were regrouping, but they hadn't made any moves yet. Jared had a feeling that they were waiting for something or someone. Maya, Jared called. She stepped up beside him, her face serious. Any updates? Maya handed him a report. We found something. The Qatar's new leader, the Chosen, has been seen near the northern border. We think she's preparing for something big. Jared's eyes narrowed. Then we need to get there first. We can't let her lead the Qatar into a decisive victory. Earth can't afford to lose. We're ready, Maya said. We've got troops stationed, and we'll move as soon as you give the order. Jared nodded, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. If they could take down this new leader, it might give Earth the chance they needed. But if they failed, we leave at dawn, Jared said, his voice steady, and we fight until the end. As the day came to a close, Jared couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Earth had won this round, but the war was far from over. The Qatar were relentless, and now, with a new leader on the horizon, the fate of humanity rested on the edge of a knife. But Jared wasn't afraid. He knew one thing for sure: humanity would fight, and they would never give up, no matter what. The air was thick with anticipation as Jared and his team prepared to move out. The Qatar's new leader, the Chosen, was still a mystery, but the threat she posed was clear. Earth had to act fast, or they risked losing the advantage they had fought so hard for. Jared stood at the front of the command center, staring at the maps laid out in front of him. His mind raced as he considered every possible move the Qatar could make. The new leader's appearance had changed everything. If the Chosen was as powerful as the rumors suggested, Earth could be facing a battle far more dangerous than anything they had fought before. "Captain," Maya said, stepping up beside him, "we've gathered as many troops as we could, but we don't know exactly where the Chosen is located. We need a plan." Jared nodded. "We'll move in carefully. We'll use the terrain to our advantage. We need to find her before she finds us." Maya glanced at the map. "There's a small settlement near the northern border. It's a good place to start." Jared rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The settlement was close to the Qatar's last known position, and it made sense to check it out. If the Chosen was there, they would have to act quickly. "We move at dawn," Jared said, his voice steady. "We find her, and we end this before she can do any more damage." The night passed in uneasy silence, and as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Earth's forces began to mobilize. The soldiers were tense, their faces grim as they prepared for the mission ahead. Jared could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just another battle, it was the turning point in the war. As they moved toward the northern border, the landscape began to change. The rolling hills gave way to dense forests, and the settlement they had planned to check was hidden deep within the trees. The Qatar were known to use the cover of nature to their advantage, and Jared wasn't going to make the mistake of underestimating them. "We'll move in groups," Jared instructed as he addressed his troops. "Stay in communication at all times. No one goes off on their own. If you see anything unusual, report it immediately." The soldiers nodded, and the group began to split into smaller teams. Jared and Maya led one team, while the others fanned out, searching for any sign of the Qatar's presence. The silence of the forest was deafening. Every step they took seemed to echo, and Jared couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His hand rested on the hilt of his weapon, ready for anything. "Stay alert," Jared whispered to his team. "We're getting close." They moved through the dense woods, their footsteps light but deliberate. The closer they got to the settlement, the more tense the air became. Jared's instincts were on high alert, and he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. And then, without warning, the quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and not their own. Jared motioned for his team to stop, his hand signaling them to take cover behind the trees. The sound grew louder, closer, and soon a figure appeared through the trees. It was a Qatar soldier, and he was moving fast, clearly on a mission. Jared's heart skipped a beat. This was it. They had found one of them. The Qatar soldier didn't seem to notice the humans hiding in the woods. Jared waited until the soldier was within range, then signaled for his team to move in. They sprang from their hiding spots and surrounded the Qatar warrior. Before the soldier could react, Jared was on him, knocking his weapon aside and taking him to the ground. The Qatar fought back fiercely, but Jared was faster, more agile. With a swift move, he pinned the soldier's arms behind his back. "Who are you looking for?" Jared demanded, his voice cold. The Qatar warrior glared at him, but didn't answer. Jared applied more pressure, forcing the soldier to speak. "The Chosen," the Qatar grunted. "You will never stop her." Jared's eyes narrowed. "Where is she?" The Qatar soldier grinned, showing his sharp teeth. "You'll never find her in time. She is the future of the Qatar. She will lead us to victory." Jared's jaw tightened. "Not if I can help it." He nodded to his team, signaling them to take the soldier into custody. They would get what they could out of him. But Jared already knew the most important piece of information. The Chosen was the key to the Qatar's strategy. As the soldier was dragged away, Jared and Maya exchanged a glance. "She's close," Maya said softly. Jared nodded. "We'll find her. And when we do, this war ends." As they pressed forward, Jared's mind kept returning to the soldiers' words. The Qatar's new leader, the Chosen, was more than just a warrior. She was the symbol of their hope, their strength, and their future. Taking her down would be the only way to ensure Earth's survival. The team continued their search, moving cautiously through the dense trees. The tension was palpable, each step taking them closer to their enemy, and to the battle that would determine the fate of their world. Finally, they'd reached the settlement, a small village hidden deep in the forest. The buildings were quiet, deserted, but Jared didn't trust the silence. He motioned for his team to spread out and search the area. Minutes passed, each one dragging on longer than the last. And then, in the distance, Jared saw it, a figure standing on the outskirts of the settlement. Tall, powerful, and unmistakably Qatar. It was her. "The Chosen," Jared whispered, his voice steady. Maya looked at him, her expression grim. "We found her." Jared's hand tightened around his weapon. This was it, the moment of truth, and Earth's future would depend on how they fought this battle. The moment Jared spotted her, he knew there was no turning back. The Chosen stood before him, her presence commanding, as though she was made to lead the Qatar to victory. She was tall, her armored figure almost glowing in the dim light of the forest. The wind caught her long, dark hair, and her eyes were cold, unyielding. Jared felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. She wasn't just a leader, she was something more. The rumors had been true. The Chosen was unlike anything he had ever faced. His soldiers gathered behind him, their faces tense with anticipation. This was the moment that would decide the war. Jared didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his weapon ready in his hand. "The war ends here," Jared said, his voice strong. The Chosen tilted her head slightly, as if considering him. "You think you can stop me?" Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable threat behind it. "I am the future of the Qatar. You are nothing." "We'll see about that," Jared replied, his eyes locked on hers. Without warning, the Chosen moved. She was faster than anything Jared had ever seen, her blade slicing through the air like a flash of lightning. Jared barely managed to duck, her weapon missing him by inches. The force of her swing sent a gust of wind that pushed him back. His soldiers were already engaging her Qatar warriors, but Jared knew that this fight wasn't like the others. This was personal. He had to defeat the Chosen to save Earth. The Chosen was on him again, her speed a blur. Jared parried her attacks, but she was relentless. Each strike was faster than the last, and Jared found himself struggling to keep up. Her strength was overwhelming, her movements calculated and precise. The sound of clashing metal filled the air as Jared blocked another blow. He stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to find a way to get through her defenses, but every move he made was countered by her superior skill. "You are not strong enough, Earthling," the Chosen said, her voice full of disdain. "You cannot defeat me. You cannot defeat the Qatar." Jared's jaw clenched. She was right. He couldn't match her strength in raw combat. But he had something she didn't: the will to fight, the determination to protect his home. Earth's future depended on him. With a swift motion, Jared dove to the side, narrowly avoiding another strike. He needed to get close, needed to land a hit. He saw an opening, just a small one, but it was enough. He lunged forward, his blade aimed for her side. The Chosen turned just in time, knocking his weapon away with ease. But Jared wasn't done. As his weapon flew from his grip, he closed the distance between them, using his body to push her back. They tumbled to the ground in a flurry of motion. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Jared was on top of her, his hands gripping her wrists as she struggled beneath him. "I won't let you destroy Earth," Jared shouted, his voice fierce. The Chosen growled, her eyes burning with fury. She struggled beneath him, trying to throw him off. But Jared held her in place, his strength fueled by desperation. He knew this was his chance. With every ounce of strength he had, he forced her arms down, pinning her to the ground. But even as he did, he felt her strength begin to rise again, her body shifting beneath him. "Get off me, Earthling," she hissed. "You are nothing." Jared's grip tightened. "I'm not letting go." Just as he thought he might lose his hold, a sudden roar filled the air. The Qatar soldiers had regrouped, and they were charging toward them. Jared's heart raced. He had no time to finish the fight. The Chosen was too powerful, and now her army was closing in. Maya's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've got you covered. Get out of there." Jared's eyes met the Chosen's for a brief moment. There was something in her gaze, something that hinted at understanding. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a leader, a symbol of her people. But it didn't matter. Jared had a duty to protect Earth, and he wasn't about to back down now. With one final push, he stood up, his eyes locked on the Chosen as he retreated. "This isn't over," he called, his voice full of defiance. "We'll be back, and we'll fight until the end." The Chosen remained lying on the ground, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her eyes never left him. And for a moment, there was a strange look in them. Was it respect, or was it anger? Jared didn't wait to find out. He turned and ran, his team following closely behind him as they retreated from the battlefield. The Qatar were still strong, but so was Earth. They had just fought the most powerful warrior that Qatar had to offer, and they had survived. For now, back at their command center, Jared and his team gathered to regroup. The battle was far from over, but they had made it through the toughest fight yet. As the soldiers cleaned their wounds and checked their equipment, Maya stepped up to Jared. "You did well out there," she said, her voice quiet but full of respect. Jared nodded, though the weight of the battle still pressed heavily on his shoulders. "We've only just begun. The Chosen is powerful, but she's not invincible. We need to be ready for the next fight." Maya smiled faintly. "We will be. We've got the best soldiers on Earth." Jared's eyes drifted to the map once more. He knew the Qatar would come again. But Earth was strong, and as long as they had people like Maya, like his team, they would fight on. As the day turned to night, Jared sat alone in his office, his mind racing. He had faced the Chosen, and while they hadn't defeated her, they had proven that Earth could stand its ground. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, Jared felt a spark of hope. They weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the night, vibrating the walls of Earth's command center. Jared stood by the large windows, staring out at the scene unfolding below. Earth's forces were preparing for the final assault. The battle that would decide the future of the planet had arrived. There was no turning back now. "The Chosen won't stop," Jared said, his voice firm but strained. "She'll keep pushing us until she gets what she wants." Maya stood beside him, her eyes narrowed as she watched the activity in the distance. "And we won't stop either," she replied. "We're ready." Jared turned to face her. The weight of the last few days, the battles they had fought, and the close calls they had survived, all seemed to settle on his shoulders. He knew this was it, the final fight. The Qatar had launched their last offensive, and they were coming in full force. They had made their way past the defenses Earth had put up, and now they were threatening to breach the last line of defense, the city. It was all or nothing now. Jared's eyes hardened. "We've got one shot at this. If we don't stop the Chosen now, Earth's done for." Maya nodded. "Then let's finish this." As Earth's forces gathered for the assault, the tension in the air was palpable. Soldiers moved quickly, checking their equipment, preparing for what would surely be their hardest fight yet. The Qatar were relentless, and now, with their new leader, they were more dangerous than ever. Jared's team was stationed at the front, tasked with holding the line while the rest of the soldiers moved in behind them. The Qatar would arrive soon. Every minute counted. Jared felt the familiar weight of his weapon in his hands. He wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. Earth's future was in his hands, and he had already faced down the Chosen once. He could do it again. This time, he wouldn't make the same mistakes. "We need to move fast," Maya said, looking over the battlefield. "If we don't take down the Chosen quickly, the Qatar will overrun us." Jared nodded. "We'll focus on the leader first. The rest of the Qatar will fall if we take her down." Minutes later, the Qatar forces appeared on the horizon. They marched in perfect formation, their ranks nearly endless. But Jared didn't flinch. His team was ready. Earth was ready. "Hold the line," Jared ordered. "Stay focused. This is our world. We're not letting them take it." The battle began in a rush of movement. Explosions lit up the sky as the two forces collided. Jared's team fought with everything they had, their weapons flashing as they pushed forward. The Qatar were strong, but Earth's soldiers were just as determined. Through the chaos, Jared spotted her, the Chosen. She was standing at the head of the Qatar army, her presence almost magnetic. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. "This is it," Jared muttered under his breath. He pushed forward, cutting through the Qatar soldiers who stood in his way. Maya and the others followed close behind, but Jared didn't wait. He needed to reach the Chosen. Nothing else mattered. As he reached the front lines, he saw the Chosen raise her blade, her eyes filled with fury. She was ready for him. Jared charged, his weapon raised high. The two met in the middle of the battlefield, their weapons clashing with a deafening sound. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the ground, knocking several soldiers off their feet. The Chosen was as powerful as ever, her strikes almost too fast to follow. But Jared was prepared this time. He blocked her attacks with precision, his every move calculated. "You cannot defeat me," the Chosen hissed, her voice full of venom. "I will lead the Qatar to victory." Jared gritted his teeth, blocking another swing. "Not today," he said, his voice low and steady. He was faster this time, more focused. He had learned from his past mistakes. He saw an opening in her defense, just a small one. With everything he had, Jared lunged forward, his weapon aimed straight at her chest. The Chosen barely had time to react. Jared's weapon struck true, the blow landing with a sickening thud. For a moment, time seemed to slow as she stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. The Qatar leader stumbled backward, her body crashing to the ground. The battlefield seemed to freeze around them as the Chosen's form fell still. Jared stood over her, his chest heaving, his weapon still raised. He had done it. They had done it. The war was over. But even as he stood there, victorious, a strange feeling washed over him. He had defeated the Chosen, but he knew this wasn't just about one battle. It had been about more than survival. It had been about the future. Earth's future. As the Qatar forces began to retreat, their morale shattered without the Chosen leading them. Earth's soldiers pressed forward. The tide of the battle had turned in their favor. The Qatar no longer had their leader to guide them, and the remaining warriors were easy to overpower. The battle raged on, but the end was in sight. Jared knew that, though victory was near, it was still a long road ahead. There would be rebuilding. There would be healing, and perhaps even an uneasy peace. As the last of the Qatar forces fell, Maya approached Jared, her face weary but triumphant. "We did it," she said softly. Jared nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Yeah, we did." The war was over, and Earth had won. But Jared knew one thing for sure. They had only just begun. They had saved their world, but there was still much work to be done, and they would do it together. With the Chosen defeated, the Qatar's invasion crumbled, and Earth's forces began the long task of rebuilding. The people of Earth had won the battle, but they knew that their strength, unity, and courage had been the true keys to their victory. Jared's mission was over, but his journey was just beginning. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity would never back down, and Earth would always fight to protect what was theirs.